What up? All my scientists, my artists, my philosophers, my geneticists, my roboticists, my biologists, my archaeologists, my astronomers. Let's get busy. This has been Busy from the Burbs.
2, 1. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ben Busy from the Burbs, broadcasting to you from Osaka, Japan. I'm joined by a very special guest today, Nikola Danaylov, the host of Singularity 101 podcast and the webmaster over there at singularityweblog.com. Nikola's reputation precedes him. I think in transhumanism, he has interviewed more people, more transhumanists or transhumanist-related technologists, scientists, engineers, so on and so forth, than anyone else in the community, in such a way that if anyone out there is familiar with graph theory and the way that complex dynamical systems work and networks work, Nikola represents kind of like a K-core node. You're kind of like the K node, Nikola, that's connecting so many different disparate fields within transhumanism. How do you shoulder that responsibility?
Well, to be honest, I don't see it as a responsibility. I see it as a lot of fun.
Very well.
And probably that's what helps me do it. It's my passion. It's what I like doing. It's what I love doing. And it's a lot of fun. I get to meet amazing people, whether on the internet or quite often in person. I get to have absolutely fantastic conversations. And I'm just enjoying the journey so much that, I don't see it as a responsibility at all most of the time. Some of the time I do.
Right. Now, how did you get started either in technology or science broadcasting? Because initially, you were an engineering student that then went to political science? Or how did that work? Can you give our listeners a brief background on that?
Sure. I was actually a pure philosophy student. And when I went to register in my sort of freshman year and had a meeting with my philosophy counselor, he basically looked at my schedule at my classes and he said, "You're a philosophy student, right?" I was like, "Yes, I am." And he's, "Well, why are you taking only philosophy?" Which kind of blew my mind at the time. I was like, so wait a second, I am a philosophy student. I'm coming here for consulting in the Department of Philosophy. I have registered for 5 philosophy courses, and your criticism to me is that I'm taking too much philosophy. And he's like, "Yeah, man, you gotta go out. Good philosophers go out in the real world. They don't do only philosophy. They do a bunch of other stuff too, so that they can do even better philosophy."
Was that true? As time went on, did you feel like his words were proven true?
Absolutely. He eventually became a good friend of mine, and he was a mentor for 5 years for the time that I was at university. And so I started as a pure philosophy student with a strong stress on ethics. In theory, at least, the best place to practice ethics should be politics. And you cannot actually do politics unless you're very well versed in economics, because economics provides the foundation for everything around us. And so in this way, I kind of ended up doing a joint specialist degree in philosophy and political science and a minor in economics. And that was my undergraduate.
How did you become exposed to some of these themes we're dealing with in transhumanism or just futurism more broadly, like AI, robotics, genetics, and so on and so forth? Was this more or less through popular culture, or did you have a friend in the engineering department or
It was actually through my research.
Really?
After my undergrad, I did a master's degree in political science, and my kind of specialty was armed conflict. So I was basically a student of war, all of its forms or most of its forms.
Right.
And I had to write a sort of a graduating thesis paper or major research paper for my master's degree. And I didn't want to write it on something that was, like World War I or World War II. Not that, those are bad topics or anything, but simply there's like thousands of people, if not tens of thousands, who have already written on those topics.
Right.
So I was looking for something fresh, something new.
Mm-hmm.
And that was around 2006 or so.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, we only had the first maybe dozen or 2 dozen of kind of poor drones that were conducting some, and mostly directed by the CIA at the time, actually, that were conducting some occasional bombing raids in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided to write my thesis on the drone warfare in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Oh, great. I mean, that's, yeah. Go ahead.
And basically, in the process of doing the research for that, I happened to fall on the work of Ray Kurzweil, a book called The Singularity is Near, which totally blew my mind. Right after it, I read another book, which is science fiction, which is called Accelerando, and it's written by Charlie Strauss. And it's kind of like The Singularity, but with meat and sinews and like sort of embodied in this amazing science fiction book by Charlie Strauss. And these two books kind of broke my mind in a way that I could not fix it afterwards. So I became very much interested in anything related to the singularity. I also happened to read some of the writings of Max Moore on transhumanism. And then this is how basically got exposed into the field.
Outstanding. That's fascinating to see that approach. So drone warfare, presumably you're familiar with the work of P.W. Singer and his book Wired for War and all that.
Of course.
There are a number of service members who listen to this podcast. I would like to point them to your paper. If it's published somewhere, they could read it. What's the name of the paper? Or maybe we could include a link to that.
So the paper is not published because, to be honest, I'm not too proud of it. I had a B+ on it, and it sort of is this B+ is the lowest passing grade in master's degree, and I had some trouble selling it even as an idea and as a topic in the Department of Political Science, because especially at the time, the topics of transhumanism or the singularity were kind of considered to be fringe topics.
These
not
are
very
disruptive by nature.
Not necessarily disruptive, more like not academic enough. Not serious enough. They were kind of more fringe topics. They were not topics for serious people, basically.
You were ahead of your time, basically.
Well, possibly a little bit, but there are some fractions of that paper published on my blog under a series of small articles called Dawn of the Killbots. And I had some excerpts from there, but basically my thesis in my paper was very simple. It was that the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan are not necessarily the clash of civilizations, as people such as Samuel Huntington wanted to portray them, but rather maybe actually the first time when increasingly automated machines start taking increasingly automated decisions as to whether a human being would live or die. And therefore, they may actually be the first time, the first shots in the conflict of the or the potential war between man and machine.
Interesting. What do you make of the risks that were most recently prominently kind of promoted by the book?
Elon Musk, Bill Gates.
Yeah, Elon Musk and Bill Gates in response to Superintelligence by Bostrom. Do you feel like this risk is warranted? Do you feel like it's over-exaggerated? Or do you foresee a Hugo de Garishian like Art-elect war between the Cosmos and the Terrans? What's your take on that?
It's definitely a possibility in my mind, but it's not the possibility in the short term, in my opinion. At least it's not the one I'm the most worried about anyway. I think it is a high-risk possibility in the mid to long term especially. Whereas in the short term, to be honest, I think that the biggest risks to humanity are not artificial intelligence, but human intelligence. We know for a fact that today there are a number of people who had their have the opportunity, they would blow us all up or kill us all if they had the chance to do that. And we also know that there are other people who may not be trying to do that, but who can be crazy and or irresponsible or just arrogant, like, for example, Mr. Putin, and who would basically stick their nose all over the world and start conflicts that we don't know how those are going to end up, whether in Ukraine or in Syria or elsewhere.
What do you think of the statement by Gorbachev, who said that the re-annexation of Crimea was a correction of a Soviet-era mistake? That, I guess,
right,
sometime in the I don't know when, Crimea
Khrushchev gave it to Ukraine. Yes.
Is there any weight to that assertion, or are we?
It all depends how far in history you go back.
Right. Yeah. I guess.
Right. So it's a very complicated issue. There's minorities there. There's lots of, Ukrainians and Russians never thought, or at least since before World War II, they didn't think they could ever go to war against each other.
Okay.
So I don't want to, sort of cherry pick and side with either side. I would just say that to me, it's the stupidest way to resolve a conflict in the way that Putin escalated it by sending the army and doing it the way he did it.
Right. The thing with Putin, I'm not here to devil's advocate anyone, but what I see, at least insofar as Syria is concerned, is I see a protracted attempt to destabilize the Assad regime, destabilize Syria to the point where Assad is deposed, going to any extreme necessary, including this chaos doctrine of arming or supporting in any way, materially, with personnel and training, ISIS. Like, that's from the outside looking in. And when I see Russia moving into Syria to kind of, tamp that down, and we have this narrative of the moderate rebels and everything. I don't mean to hijack this into a political science discussion, but I see Putin, maybe definitely not the greatest guy, okay? No one's arguing that point. But who doesn't have blood on their hands in this conflict? Who isn't to blame? It seems like, at least...
No, sure. In that sense, like, I got confused a little bit in the beginning of your statement when you were saying about ISIS and stuff, because I was kind of worried that you're going to suggest that Putin is doing that. But
no.
Of course, Putin is supporting Assad.
Right.
They're very close allies. In fact, it's very possible Assad wouldn't have survived so far if he didn't have the support from Putin.
Right.
So, yes, Putin is a better ally than maybe most of the sort of anti-government rebels, especially for sure better than ISIS.
Yes.
But the problem is that this has gotten to be such a complicated, tangled, Pandora's box.
So much so.
That, and with the Saudis and the other people supporting different fractions there, with Israel right next door, with Lebanon, with Iraq, with Turkey having its own problems with the Kurdish minority, which is kind of fighting to start up its own Kurdistan, which is kind of right now spilled over in Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and even Iran. So it's a very complicated issue, and
to give people a sense of the scale, I mean, we're talking about countries with different ethnic backgrounds, different histories, languages that exist approximately as close to each other as maybe the state of Maine in the United States exists with, like, a Kentucky or a Tennessee. Like, we're talking about a very geographically relatively small area that has more divisively separate or vying powers existing in such close proximity to one another. So
it's just
it's quite a tangled web. Okay, so a brief departure, right? Back to the lecture at hand. What has been your most rewarding interview experience so far?
That's like asking a parent to tell you what's their favorite child.
They all have a favorite. Nikola, tell us who your favorite is.
Even if they do you think they would say that they do?
Well, well, come on. You can tell us. We're not going to tell anyone.
You know what? I love learning.
Yes.
So in each and every episode, I try and learn something.
Mm-hmm.
And so some are harder, some are easier, some are more fun,
Mm-hmm.
some are less fun. But I try to learn in each and every one of them. And when I go rewatching them, I always, or re-listening to my old podcast, I always discover new things.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I've learned is that, for example, right after an interview, if you ask me, did this go well? I can never get it right.
Good to go.
I always think I messed up something or that it wasn't good enough. And you know, the other thing is that, of course, if I say this is my favorite one, someone would say, well, that's your worst one.
Okay.
And then if I say this is my best one, someone would say, no, it's your worst one, and vice versa. So everyone likes different things because they associate with different themes or different kind of gems and elements in the conversation.
You live up to your code name in that response, Nikola, is that you are Socrates, the man with the questions, not the answers, right?
Exactly.
Yes,
exactly.
precisely. What I think is maybe a clever way to get out of having to answer that question, but that's
Well, no, let me just speak a little bit more about that. So my kind of philosophy on blogging and
Right.
podcasting is that I may have an opinion,
Mhm.
and I rarely hide it.
Mhm.
In fact, I never do, and sometimes it can come out quite strongly.
Mm.
But I don't necessarily put that opinion on a pedestal. I don't make it the right opinion. I always use it as a sort of a talking point to
Right.
bounce off other ideas. And the goal is to basically set up a symposium where we lay out the possibilities. And then if I've done my job right, the audience itself would be able to give birth to its own ideas. And so if I've done my job well, I would be at best a midwife. And people would have out their own conclusions and they'll learn their own lessons.
right. It's just a
So
matter
that's
of
kind of my philosophy on blogging and podcasting.
right. You're like there to kind of establish the structures, like maybe paint the perimeter, and then kind
Right.
of let people discuss within those bounds. Now, what about human emotion? I mean, how does this play into it? Because you seem to be a really even keel kind of guy. That is to say, you seem to be really balanced, kind of even tempered, very equanimous. How do you contend with like anger, for example? I don't think I've ever heard you get really angry or passionately angry about an issue. Is there anything that really lights your fire, as it were?
Yes. So you have to watch. So let me say two things. So first of all, what you say is true, but it's taken years of practice.
All right.
And secondly, and so most, let's say 99.99% of my podcast episodes, that's the case. Because my whole approach when I start an episode is that it's not about me.
Right.
It's about the person that I'm interviewing. It's about their ideas. And most of all, it's about my audience. So I am just a man with the questions. I am like the gadfly. I am a nobody. I am of importance. I am just like the storyteller in a way that who doesn't want to bring attention to himself. So I want to do the best I can to be even kiltered, as you said, and sort of bring forth the best or worst ideas from the people I'm talking about, but let you judge which one is what.
Right.
However, there's been exceptions. So
I want to hear.
there's one exception, particularly of all my interviews, that stands out. It's the second interview that I did with Professor Robin Hansen
Okay.
about his book called The M Economy, or something like that. It's been a couple of years, but it's about M's, mind uploads, basically. and you can go listen to that interview, and that's the interview that I got like really fired up. And also in my personal life, I am not very even kiltered. You should guys know that.
Okay.
That's just a fact. I am a very passionate guy.
All right.
I don't beat around the bush. I'm the worst diplomat in the world.
All right.
I shoot straight, and I go for the jugular.
Charge
And-
the hill.
And yeah, and it's just not my style to start with useless preambles and to
Right.
waste time. If I want to say something, I just say it.
What was it
And-
about? What was it about Robin Hansen's interview, the M economy? Presumably that stands for the mind upload economy, I guess. What was
Yeah.
it in that particular interview that really got your dander up?
So a couple of things. So first of all, Robin Hansen is a very smart, very nice guy. He's an economist. He has a very rich biography, not only in economics but also in software and so on. But what got me really going is that one, he kind of has a very, in my opinion, extremist right-wing kind of a take on the world.
Like
And-
anarcho-capitalism kind of take?
Hardcore anarcho-libertarian capitalism.
Good to go.
And that's not the problem, you see.
Right.
That's not a problem at all. That's perfectly fine. The
Yeah.
problem is that he's trying to disguise it and sell it as social science.
Okay.
That's where things started pushing me really bad. And then when I was actually very privileged to read sort of the early draft of his book, and he was starting to talk about, how people would be up-clocked or down-clocked, how it was the most efficient thing to have a police force or an executive or a legislative force, basically by appointment, basically getting away with the Constitution. And he even at some point went as far as suggesting that the Third Reich would have been a democracy by today.
Okay.
And that kind of really did it for me. So
Right.
basically I asked, and I even kind of told him, I hate your book before we started the interview, and I'm going to come
Beautiful.
at you with everything I come. So if you want to, with everything I can. So if you want to cancel it, that's okay. That's cool.
Right.
But just be forewarned that I really hate your book, and I'm not going to, shy away from saying it.
Are you familiar with neo-reactionaryism, or what is known as the Dark Enlightenment, Nikola?
Yeah, I used to kind of live in those shades
Right.
10
The
years ago, but it's been a while.
there was this. I had a podcast with a friend of mine, Brain Police, and we were discussing kind of like the rudiments of that movement, kind of its origins, and presumably it was birthed by the libertarian movement, but it includes these shades, these subtle hues of white nationalism that are kind of bizarre when taken in context with the fact that transhumanism and the like, many of these Dark Enlightenment folks or neo-reactionaries also are from the Bay Area. There's one rather famous neo-reactionary, former transhumanist, still a transhumanist, but former organizer for the Singularity Summit, which I think then became the Global Futures or something.
MIRI, Machine Intelligence Research Institute.
Right. His name is Michael Anisimov. And
I know Michael is a friend of mine, yes.
Right, yeah. I have love for Michael. He's a divisive personality as far as I see it, and kind of steps on the gas when what we should be doing is kind of more steering. What do you make of the neo-reactionary movement? Would you classify Robin Hansen's book as classically neo-reactionary at this point? And what's your own personal
I suggest,
opinion?
I don't know if you want to continue pursuing that point per se, but especially in sort of the theoretical realm of things, whether it's neo-reactionary or not. But, Robin, to give him his credit, told me that after my interview, he, and maybe maybe or maybe not as a direct result of the interview, he actually changed his whole book and redrafted it and rewrote it, and basically changed 90% or wrote a fresh 90% of it because he
Did
thought
you read that to confirm it?
No,
Yeah.
no, I did not. But and I have serious disagreements with Michael on a variety of issues
Yeah.
that you can name. So I don't know what to say.
How would
Going
you?
back to the original point,
Right.
yeah, I do get very fired up sometimes, and in my personal life, I'm a very passionate guy, and people often can find me unpleasant because I don't beat around the bush, as I said. But in my podcast and in my work, generally, I try to be as even-keeled and as even-headed as possible, simply because I don't want to make it about me, and I don't want to make it about what I think. I want to make it about the audience. And in some cases like this one, when it's been totally extreme, I just couldn't hold myself. But yeah,
I
that
look
was
forward.
the only exception out of 183 interviews that I've done so far.
I can't wait to. I'm gonna as soon as we're finished with this podcast, that's what I'm going to listen to. I have a question. Do you feel? It seems like your passionate individuals feel as though like time is of the essence. There is no time to waste. We must seize the day. We must go forward and do the work now. No procrastination. Let's get off our asses and make it happen. How do you reconcile, and if that's an inaccurate characterization of you as a person, please let us know. But I want to know, how do you reconcile that with this more like leisurely kind of Epicurean destiny promoted or proposed by some transhumans, where it's like, look, man, just relax, man, just sit
That's the
back.
Buddhist attitude too, yeah.
How do you reconcile those?
So, well, here's the thing: you don't have to reconcile those, right?
Interesting.
So life is a paradox. That's one of the postulates of Buddhism, right? Life is a paradox. Embrace it. Don't try and resolve it. So there are certain things which are a total waste of time, and many things are in a way a certain way. So, for example, to me, if you can say something in a sentence rather than in a paragraph, it's always best if you say it in a shorter way.
That's just
Now, unfortunately, the problem is that people get insulted. People think that you're attacking them, whereas you're not attacking them. You're just talking about a certain specific thing, but they take it personally. And so that can create complications sometimes. But generally speaking, I still think that the shortest, distance between 2 points is a straight line. And if you have to say something anyway, just go ahead and say it in the clearest, most unambiguous way possible.
So you must love flat design then.
No, not necessarily. Hold on. Let me. So that as I said, is kind of on the one hand. On the other hand, I am an Epicurean, and my actual philosophy is an ancient Greek ethics, Socratic ethics, and he kind of started the beginning of the Cyrenaic school and the Epicureans and a bunch of others. And I have very strong influence from them in my own personal ethics. And if I'm 100% atheist, but if I have to pick a religion that I very much sort of that I love, because it's kind of like more of a philosophy, that would be Buddhism.
Okay.
And so, the paradox is that in most things I'm very straightforward and straight to the point, and in some cases I can be very relaxed and very kind of this is just life. I think it was in the Shogun Scrolls maybe, or was it in the Hagakure, the Book of the Falling Leaf, that they were saying, do the small things, do the serious things as if they were a joke, and do the not serious things seriously.
That sounds like Hagakure, yeah.
Right? So that's kind of like the attitude that I'm trying to embrace with my life. Doesn't mean I can do it all the time, but Yeah, so
So you
people think I can be very pedantic because I'm very much about the detail and very much straightforward. And yet sometimes when it comes to the big decisions, so for example, when it comes to the big decisions in my life, that's to say to leave Bulgaria, to come, first I came to America, then I went to Canada.
when did you leave Bulgaria?
I think I left in 1997.
So that was like after or shortly before the Balkan conflict? I mean, that had been ongoing for
After.
some time. After, okay.
After. Depends about which ones you're talking, but mostly after the sort of the former Yugoslavia wars. Yeah. So
You came to the
all of
United
those,
States.
right. But all of those decisions that I made, first to leave Bulgaria, then to come to Canada, and then finally to get married to my wife, all of those were not logical decisions.
Okay.
So I'm a very logical person, is what
Right.
I'm trying to say. But all the major decisions in my life were not logical necessarily, but were kind of emotional. Or
When were
if
you-
they were logical, they were at a different level.
When were you exposed first to Buddhism? Were in Bulgaria? Did you come across like the Eightfold Path or the what is it, the Dhammapada or whatever?
Well, first of all, when I was a kid, I used to have this book with ancient Hindu legends and myths that I loved reading. Then when I was in the army, I was actually doing a lot of yoga
Interesting.
and reading a lot of yoga. And, Buddhism is basically Hinduism stripped for export. So this is how it started. Then I started doing martial arts. I did judo and aikido for a while. I mean, aikido was my passion for about 3 or 4 years until I got so many injuries that I just couldn't do it anymore. But
Right.
and I dabbled with karate and the other ones, but and jiu-jitsu, of course. But aikido was my passion, and yeah. So then I got exposed to Buddhism, and I've always been interested in philosophy, and I thought, well, isn't it nice to balance Western philosophy with Eastern philosophy?
Right.
And sort of the axioms in Eastern philosophy are kind of almost diametrically opposite to the axioms in the Western philosophy.
How so?
Well, Western philosophy is very rationalistic.
Reductionist.
Yes, and Eastern philosophy is quite different, and
Holistic.
also Western philosophy is very serious.
Yes.
Eastern philosophy is very cheerful. It's got this kind of a joke kind of end to it. It's like, oh, isn't it all fun?
Right, but don't you feel like, because I don't know, just in my observations of it and having interacted with people who've lived over there and everything, it seems like no matter what organized religion it is, be it Western or Eastern, they all kind of fail in the same way. They all have patriarchy, hierarchy, orthodoxy. They all kind of, like, if you're meditating and, it's working for you, someone will come along and be like, you're doing it wrong. It's like, well, okay, maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But what do you think about this notion? And C.G. Jung said it himself when he said it's dangerous for Westerners to actually delve into these Eastern ways. But I mean, I did anyway, because they had a certain exotic appeal to me, right? It was like, this was new, I hadn't experienced this. But what do you make of do you think that we're just kind of hypnotized by it in the West because it's kind of alien to us, so we're kind of attracted to it in that way?
No, I think actually it's quite healthy if you are attracted to something that's different than what you have or learn or know. I think it makes you. Diversity is a strength; it's not a weakness.
Right.
So if you're, and it's also an evolutionary strength, if you will, because if you have a single kind of point of view or a single feature,
Right.
you're not adaptable, whether that's physically in the biological sense or whether it's intellectually.
Yeah.
The more diverse you are, whether physically or biologically or intellectually, the more adaptable you will be, the more creative I believe you will be.
Right.
And I even think you'd be a nicer person, and especially with the Western science has this very kind of a serious serious undertone with it, like, this is serious business done by serious people in
Yeah.
a serious, dark, old institutions.
Yes.
It's no joke kind of thing. And
Right.
then you see the other point of view, which says it's all a joke, man. Relax. Don't take it too seriously. Shit happens, and do the small things as if they're crucially, vitally important, and do the big things as if they're a joke. And you're like, really? How's that work? And I think that once you start diving into it, sure, any study has some risks and costs associated with it, but I think most people would find that very cheering, very rewarding, and very helpful for their personal and professional lives.
So, do you practice a certain form of meditation regularly? Is this something that you do on a daily basis?
I used to meditate a lot, almost every day, and then I had years that I lapsed, and then I tried to get back into it, and now I'm at the point where I meditate irregularly.
A living meditation, if you will.
So maybe 3-4 times a week, but I don't have a specific time. I don't have a. Basically, I may be halfway through my day and I'll be like, okay, this is a perfect spot for me to meditate for 10, 15, 20 minutes. Or maybe I'll wake up and I'll do it, or maybe I'll do it before going to bed or whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't have sort of a set routine right now.
I have to get back into it as well. It's been years since, after joining the military and serving, it would have been a nice kind of coincidence of opposites for me to be serving and meditating. Like, you were serving and you were doing yoga.
That was my peak, by the way, actually. That was the time when I was meditating the most. And that was the time when I was in the best kind of yoga shape of my life.
I've heard it said, right, because you were doing it every day?
Yeah, I was doing it every day, all the time, especially, when I was doing night watch or anything like that. I had I think 128 armed watches in my service. And, they're 24 hours rotation, kind of 2 hours out, 2 hours sort of ready to go, and 2 hours sleeping kind of deal.
Oh, man.
And when you do 128 of those, it's kind of like you find, I'm in the middle of nowhere, like in the mountains in Bulgaria. We're guarding these kind of warehouses with weaponry for, I think it was Third Army at the time. And basically there's nothing happening. I'm between two lines of fences.
Right.
And I'm just sitting there, so I might as well cross my legs and sort of try and meditate a little bit and stuff like that. And I used to do that. And then when I'm on my next 2 hours, I can actually start doing some stretches and stuff like that. Of course, I don't really had the chance to most of the time take my clothes off or properly or anything. But then the next day you have a day off, so you can't do those back to back by law. So you have to have a day off, and then on that day off, kind of you can, which is not a day off, meaning you're not out in town, but you're like off from like duty, active duty. So then you can sleep in and you can do some more yoga or stuff.
There's a lot of comparisons that I drew during my time on Paris Island between military service and monastic life that I felt were so clear and so undeniable that for anyone that had any knowledge of, say, Zen Buddhist monks, both their aesthetic look with the shorn head, right, shaved head, and also their tending to the Zen gardens, which are basically these sandboxes that they rake.
Perfect.
Right? Well, I found myself on Paris Island at 4 a.m. Every morning for 13 weeks outside of my squad bay, raking what is known as the pit. And for those who have served in the Marine Corps, they know what the pit is. The pit is basically a large sandbox that's outside, and they're positioned strategically throughout Paris Island. And these are areas where recruits are taken to be given what is known as incentive training, which is high intensity training where they'll say push, 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 and you have to do push-ups, and they'll be like, all right, high knees, high knees, high knees, and you have to run in place, and then mountain climbers, and they'll just sap you. They'll sap all your energy in less than a minute. And there are these giant sandboxes. And I found myself every morning at 4 a.m. out there with a shaved head, surrounded by other men with shaved heads, raking this giant sand pit. And it struck me as like, wow, this is basically this is like a Zen Buddhist monastery that is just insane.
And it totally is insane, and it's funny, and it's tragic, and it's comedy,
yes.
And it's all at once. Mm-hmm. It's funny how you bring the point of the shaved heads, because mm-hmm. Of course when I was a rookie, of course, I have a shaved head now because I'm bald. Yeah. But when I was 18, I had
wear it proudly,
hair.
Brother. Wear it proudly.
I don't care, honestly. For me, it's just one less thing to worry about. So it actually is very helpful. I just take a shower, razor my head in the meantime, shave my head when
Larry David actually says that you are being, what do you say, kind of deceitful, and that you should actually just let it grow out. He says, Larry David, who is the co-creator of Seinfeld, very funny guy, he gets angry at guys who are balding or bald, but and bick their heads. He's like, why would you do that? Why are you doing that? Of course, like, I can't really speak to this. You'd have to talk to Larry about it. But yeah, the bald look looks good on you. So
Thanks.
You were so what were you saying about the short head?
I was saying about how when you become an apprentice in a monastery,
right,
they shave your head, and
right.
when you go to be a rookie in the army, they shave your head.
Right.
And it's kind of done for that particular reason. It's kind of touching on the topic that we were discussing about the difference between East and West, in a sense that they're trying to get rid of so Western science is all about focusing on the details and about how serious and how very important those details are.
Yeah.
And the Eastern world says, well, if you get down to the essence of it, to the core of it, everything is the same. There's people are not too different. Everything comes into one thing, and if you learn that one thing, you know everything. And they focus rather on removing the differences. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of quite the opposite, but it's an interesting similarity how in the army, mm-hmm. if you are, I believe, in the right environment, you can be exposed to a lot of those ideas. And that mm-hmm. brings me again to my point about meditation. Mm-hmm. And I want to stress that I have a little bit of a wider understanding of the term meditation. It's not only necessarily I have to be, cross-legged with my eyes closed. Right. You can be with your eyes open, and you can be actually actively involved in thinking, in that kind of meditation, like in the Descartesian sense of meditation.
I see, yes.
So you can be meditating on a topic as you're sort of looking into somewhere out there.
But how is that distinct from just thinking about something?
It's like the depth and the focus that you have on the topic. So, for example, you can be in the East, you can meditate on a candle, mm-hmm. right? You put a candle in front of you and you can use a candle. Or you can have a waterfall mm-hmm. and you can meditate on the sound of a waterfall or whatever. Yeah. So you sort of get into the thing and get out of the thing. Yes. You sort of focus so profoundly, so deeply into that one aspect. And the same, let's say if you have a huge problem to resolve personally or professionally, you can kind of get so focused on it mm-hmm. that you exclude everything else. That's kind of a type of a meditation in my view, in some senses. In some sense of the word. There's
possibly the greatest UFC fighter of all time. His name's John Jones, and recently he's been suspended from the UFC, but really a marvel, a modern marvel, fighting machine, and just truly an incredible fighter. He requests, before he goes into battle, quote unquote, before he has a UFC fight, every time, when he comes into the city where they're going to be fighting, he always says, I have to go to water. Take me to water. And then he just sits there and he meditates on the water. Like Bruce Lee famously said, be like water, my friend,
Yes.
so on and so forth.
Yes.
So there is this, I think I'm trying to connect kind of disparate lines here, but there is this connection between being a warrior, a fighter, meditating, and so on and so forth, and using different, what would you say, in Inception, they had those little tokens or the totems. Basically, having an object that you can focus on. And what you're saying is, in a Western tradition, perhaps, you could, or not Western tradition, but in your definition of meditation, where it's not so pigeonholed, you have to be sitting cross-legged with your eyes closed, you could hold anything in your mind, whether it's the singularity or whatever, robotics,
transhumanism, or a problem, or sort of like an issue with your girlfriend. It doesn't matter.
That
or
can
a
become your
business
totem.
idea, or a religious thing, or doesn't matter, anything. And actually, in the Western tradition, there's a number of people, like, for example, if you read Descartes' books, he has the meditations, and there's a number of other Western philosophers and essayists and authors who talk about meditations.
Well, who is it? There's a Caesar. Marcus Aurelius has a whole book called Meditations, doesn't he?
Right, and that's also kind of originating still from the ancient Greek influences and stuff like that. So,
fascinating point here. I'm wondering. So recently, you had made the news. I mean, because the video that you released recently, there was a talk you gave in Amsterdam for the Singularity School, like satellite campus or something, and it was basically a review or critique on the Singularity Institute and how it kind of Singularity University appears to be more of like kind of like a money-making kind of organization than it really is living up to its charter, which states that it is to be a transformative or I don't know.
Well, its mission is to improve the life of 1 billion people within 10 years.
Right.
That's the mission.
Right, and Nikola did the math early in the talk. You can look at it. I'll link it in the comment in the description. But they haven't even begun to approach fulfilling that mission, have they?
Well,
or have
you
they?
know that's one of those things that it very much is important how you construct it, right?
Okay.
So they would say that they have, if you count arguably some of their students or some of their people who have attended and what they have done. Okay. And they would like to take credit for much or most of those things. And that may be up to you whether how fair that is or how unfair that is. So, for example, for me, when I have someone, on the one hand, I get people who send me emails who say, well, thanks to you, I'm a 17-year-old kid, and thanks to you, now I'm 18, and I wanna study cognitive science, or I wanna study computer science, or math, or applied math, or physics, or whatever.
Right.
And I can maybe take credit for that, and people have changed their businesses, or shifted their businesses, and pivoted, or came up with idea. But to me, that's kind of, personally speaking, a little bit uncomfortable, because maybe I was one of the factors contributing to that change, but I don't think I was the primary factor, because at the end of the day, the primary mover is the person, and I am just a sort of an external factor which has some impact, but it's a momentary impact. Whereas to accomplish anything of that sort, you have to have duration, you have to have longevity in the pursuit, and that doesn't come from me. Right, that comes from them. And so I personally shy away from taking credit for any of those things. And that's why I wouldn't count them. They would respond that, well, they maybe have some things that maybe are not so popular and people don't know about them, or they have people in the works that will be accomplishing that change. To me, as it stands right now, they haven't had the clear-cut impact that they're going for. for a number of reasons, and I went through them in my presentation. And this is a good example where I kind of got totally fired up and sort of
Raw.
gave it all a go.
Motivate, dedicate. So I had the chance to visit the Singularity University campus, quote unquote. I mean, it amounts to just a building or a couple of buildings on Moffett Field, or I forget what the name of the Air Force Base is, but in California, there, the Bay Area near San Francisco, and I was struck by the austerity of it. Like these are old, aged buildings. I went there with my friend Cosmo, and he was explaining to me that the NASA interns and the Singularity University students kind of share similar lodging. And I was looking at it, and these I mean, they were barracks. These were Air Force dormitories, or
Right.
that were repurposed.
So imagine that's a 1960s airfield that was built sort of in the peak of the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go even down in the basement, those are nuclearly hardened basements. They're supposed to withstand nuclear hits and stuff.
Right.
It's crazy. And we had like 3-inch long cockroaches.
That's what I heard about. The cockroaches were like a big.
Right. And we
Yeah.
were calling them the NASA cockroaches. and they had the old sort of intercom from the 1960s where you have a button near your door and like a little speaker thing, and you speak to it and someone speaks to you something. It was hilarious.
Right. And the reason that this struck me as like kind of strange was that I take it that the executive training programs that the Singularity University puts on, these aren't like, community college tuition fees. These are rather expensive programs. And I'm wondering, wait a minute,
Right.
okay, there's a revenue, there's coming in, but the facilities look like dog shit. Like, why is there this disconnect?
Well, I would say give them a break on that, because for two reasons at least, right?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, one of the things that they kind of overstress is that they have a partnership with NASA. The reality is that they're a renter. They pay rent to NASA to use the campus, and the campus would otherwise be empty. It would not be used. Those are very old facilities, and they try to use it as a marketing tool to say, okay, look, we are located on the NASA Ames campus and stuff like that. Also, the price that you pay is very expensive, not for the facilities, but for the kind of people that you are able to meet there, that they have to bring and fly and lodge, and the places that you're going to go visit. And those are places like, for example, not only Google and Facebook and Apple and so on, but also like Lawrence Livermore National Ignition Facility,
Right.
where now they work on fusion, but where previously they used to make nuclear weapons. So all those places, and the program is 10 weeks, and they actually do lose money on that program, because the stuff that you get is so expensive, and also you don't pay, by the way, any food while you're there. You don't pay, room and board are taken care of for you. So that program is particularly expensive, generally speaking.
You think that that it's justified? You think that it's worth the value that?
Absolutely. I think the program is worth the value. I think it's justified. And I believe them when they say that they're losing money on that specific program. Now, where I start having problems is when they start trying to host events like summits or conferences and things like that, and they start asking for $500,000 to host a 2-day event.
Right.
That's when I start having problems. And I that's only one of the examples. But another example is the fact that they don't put any of the lectures or available for free online.
Yeah, they don't do that, right? They have such a wealth. There's such a great library of
6 or
awesome
7
lectures.
years.
6 or 7 years. I remember I saw a Robert McNamara. Robert McNamara. It was Bob McNamara's speech. He's like the co-inventor or inventor of Ethernet. They posted his talk online, and it was awesome because he's just such a badass. You know, he's just a salty motherfucker. You know what I mean? But the fact that they haven't posted all these other ones, I'm like, you know, there's such a value. They could land with such greater impact if maybe they just lack the right curator for that stuff. Is that the case,
I don't
Nikola?
think it's just a curator. I think it's a deliberate decision which results from what I have called to be a scarcity mindset.
Yeah. Well,
And
even if they're monetizing it, why aren't they? Like, they could be getting revenue from that if they established a YouTube presence or something online and were getting ad impressions. At least they'd be getting something. Now, instead,
Right.
they're getting nothing.
But that revenue, you have to understand, is greatly exaggerated. It's laughable. So,
Yeah.
for example, let me give you some numbers.
But
Like,
it's better
I do-
than zero. That's what I'm getting at. It's like
but
it's
it's
more
nothing.
than zero.
It's close to zero. So
Well.
I get over 50,000 views a month on my YouTube channel,
Mhm.
and I make, let's say, $150, $60 a month with some peaks of $210, $20, and if it's real bad, it's like $120, $30. So in other words, the revenue from those ads is absolutely laughable.
Right.
It's not nothing, as you said, but it's very close right next to it. So to me, they can just, the point of putting there is not to make the revenue, but
Right.
it's to make an impact. It's
Right.
to accomplish their mission statement, is to help and to improve the life of 1 billion people within 10 years. Because it is easier to do that if you have an open sort of abundance mindset, and you put the content out there and you allow people who are interested to go and sort of drink from the well, as it were, for
Yeah.
free, rather than have the closed garden scarcity mindset and say, well, if we do that, then they're not going to come here.
Right.
Right.
And then this goes for everybody, and I'm talking to, you know, organizations like Nature. I'm talking about anything that's behind a paywall, any piece of knowledge that is kind of in a prison, locked away in an ivory tower somewhere. All of that stuff needs to come out into the light. People need to be exposed to it because it's going to. I mean, this is my theory. Maybe I'm wrong. You can correct me if you think I'm wrong. But I think that if this material were made available, that the net benefit would be greater than right now, which is, you know, we're getting none of that benefit.
Absolutely. And one of the things about knowledge is actually that knowledge, in contrast to, let's say, material possessions, actually grows when you share it,
Right.
rather than shrinks. So that's the most fundamental difference. And so people who are kind of materially predisposed and sort of learn a lesson from the scarcity world of physical possessions and try to translate that into the world of knowledge, usually get it upside down, because knowledge is exactly the opposite. The more you share it, the more it grows.
Right.
So rather than hoarding, you should try sharing.
So that's the takeaway, ladies and gentlemen, and robots, if you're listening, is that if you have knowledge, share it, because that's what's important. That's what's going to make the world a better place. So I want to thank Nikola. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Of course, everyone that's listening, Singularity 101 podcast, okay, check it out, as well as the website Singularity Weblog, that's WEBLOG weblog.com. And any final words for the listeners, Nikola?
Well, let me think about it. Do you have any Marines in the audience?
Ra.
Okay, well, just as a point of curiosity, maybe, since you mentioned Singularity University, a good friend of mine there is a Marine Colonel whistleblower named Franz Geil.
Motivate.
So Google the guy. He was a whistleblower. They came at him very hard, and his sort of blowing the whistle on the armored personnel carriers and a bunch of other issues in Iraq eventually according to some estimates, saved 5,000 or 6,000 American soldiers.
It was his criticism that actually
Right.
required these APCs and Humvees to be up armored, right? Because they didn't have the right armor.
And he was one of the first one who blew the whistle on it, and they came at him hard, and they kicked him out, and they removed his security clearance, and they destroyed the guy.
There was a lieutenant colonel or a major in Afghanistan who was recently removed from command and forced to retire because he blew the whistle on the Afghanistan police force. The national police force presumably is a bunch of pedophiles. Now that's a gross generalization, but he had accused them and had proof of this, and it's been known for some time that the Afghanistan National Police Force is not to be trusted. They'll shoot an American service member in the back and not think twice about it. They molest young boys. It's basically in the culture there. It's called Bachi Boys, and he blew the whistle on it.
Yeah, they dressed him up as girls.
Right. He blew the whistle on it, and they ushered him out of the Marine Corps. Meanwhile, and I don't want to get too political here, but someone like Hillary Clinton can broadcast sensitive information over her private email network, and that's fine. But we have this disconnect, this disproportionate response. At least if you're going to punish one person, punish them all the same way. But so there's a lot to be said about just sometimes the military and government gets it so wrong. And it's terrible when it happens, and you just hope that over time he'll be exonerated.
Right, he was, and now he works, I think, as a civilian advisor or consultant or something like that for the Pentagon.
Good to go.
But it took years, and they destroyed his life in the meantime.
Right.
And he even was not allowed to attend Singularity University the first time he was accepted there. So
wow.
Basically, the Marine Corps banned and sent a warning to NASA, to SU, not to accept him and all kinds of stuff like that. But
he
got accepted the following year.
Motivated.
And we became great friends. So he's like an older brother or something to me. But
I want to check him out. Franz Geil, spelled
Franz Geil. Yeah, Jayl.
Jayl.
Gayl. Franz Geil.
Gayl. I'm thinking when you say Guile, all I was picturing was Guile from Street Fighter 2. So that's the image that I have in my mind. Sonic Boom.
Yeah.
All right.
Great guy. Love him and love the Marines.
Motivate. We love you too, Nikola. Thank you very much. And again, any questions, comments, concerns, please email us at getbusypodcast@gmail.com. We're looking for guests, so if you have any suggestions, please send them our way. Thanks again very much, Nikola. We'd like to have you on the program in the future if you'd be open to that.
My pleasure. I'd be open, of course.
Outstanding. All right. Thank you, everyone, very much for listening, and thank you, Nikola.